Hi everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. Well, I was goofing around on the internet and I stumbled across Harley Davidson's website. I noticed an ad for people interested in Ultra Limited, and Harley was offering to sell that bike for $29,800 MSRP. Of course, it excludes other fees and surcharges and things like that. But they said for top tier credit, they would finance with a down payment of 10% on the bike, so $2,980 for an 8-year loan terms, that's 96 months, at 12.35% interest, and that's for top tier credit. So you can imagine the interest rate would be even higher with lower tier credit scores. So that's a lot of money. I'm going to break down the numbers, but the whole purpose of this video, I'm just using this particular bike as an example, is can you really afford to buy a new motorcycle? My definition, and it's not like a Dave Ramsey type of advice, you know, or you got to skip your morning coffee in order to do things with your money that's more fruitful. You know, I'm leaving it up to individual choice that people aren't going to be spending their rent money or their food money on a motorcycle instead of those things. And you know, you got to figure in your other expenses like your car and everything else. So I'm just going to look at it strictly from the motorcycle perspective and in terms of a business practice as to whether you could actually afford a given bike or not. So I'm going to go through all the details. Stay with me. If you have any comments, please drop them in the comments section and I'll respond to as many of them I can. Usually I respond to all of them. Also, please hit that subscribe button if you like this kind of content. So going back to this Harley Ultra Limited example, you're looking at payments of $441 a month. And again, that's not including any extended warranty, doesn't include any negative equity if you had it on a trade-in. It's just strictly looking at the price of this new bike in terms of the interest rate and the loan terms and your down payment. So that's a lot of money. It boils down to, with the down payment, a total outlay of over $45,000. And at 12.35% interest rate over 8 years, you're going to spend over $15,000 in interest charges alone. This is how it looks on the amortization schedule in terms of interest and principal each year. Obviously, the amount of interest that you pay in any given year goes down, so those interest charges are front loaded. Here's a plot of the loan balance over the life of the loan, in this case 8 years, what your interest is going to be as well. And as you can see towards the end, you're paying over $15,000 just in interest charges. So my definition as to whether you can afford to give a motorcycle or not is if for some reason you had to sell that bike, could you sell it for at least as much money as you owe on the bike so you can get out free and clear? So you don't end up defaulting on the loan. You're not relying on having to come up with extra cash to pay off the loan. It's just strictly, hey, I'm going to get at least what I owe on the bike for somebody to buy it from me. And a quick sale is going to usually be with a dealer, and that's going to be at wholesale pricing. So I'm going to look at both depreciation and just interest charges and things like that to kind of come up with what I think is the sweet spot as a litmus test for whether you can actually afford a given bike or not. So a couple of years ago I was researching what the resale value was on a typical Harley, say a base Street Glide, and what I found is that if you go out about an 8-year period, the bike's worth maybe 50 to 60% of what you paid for it. And interestingly, if you take the purchase price in any given year and adjust it for inflation, it turns out it's about $25,000 a year, year in and year out. In fact, adjusted for inflation, the price has actually been going down a little bit. And I think that's an indication that Harley looks for greater and greater efficiencies. They apply more pressure to their suppliers. I think they're outsourcing component production overseas to lower their unit costs on these bikes. So in essence, the bike prices adjusted for inflation have been about the same year in and year out. But obviously anything you buy is going to depreciate. And typically a motorcycle is going to lose at least 20% of its value after the first couple of years. And if you spend extra money on accessories and upgrades, you can pretty much just kiss that extra money goodbye. You're not going to get it back on a trade-in or a sale for the most part. So let's look at a specific example. Here's a 2015 Harley Davidson Ultra Limited, and it retailed for over $27,000. The current retail on average price for this bike is $16,000. The reason I looked at 2015, that's 8 years ago. So I'm thinking, you know, if I buy a Ultra Limited now for around $30,000, what's the resale going to look like versus what I've paid in on that bike in terms of overall purchase price and interest charges? So you can say to yourself, okay, well, I bought this bike for $27,000 in 2015. Now it's worth $16,000. But keep in mind, that's $16,000 in today's dollars. If you adjust that for what it would be in 2015 dollars, it's only $12,500. So in 8 years, the true value of that 2015 Ultra Limited is less than half of the $27,000 purchase price. So if that happened during the last 8 years, it's probably fair to say that that's going to happen 8 years from now on this 2023 Ultra Limited if I were to buy it. Now, I'm going to give you some specific rules of thumb, as it were, or my advice on deciding whether you could actually afford a given motorcycle, no matter what the brand is. It's just general financial principles. So going back to what I said earlier, my definition of deciding whether you could afford a bike or not is if you've got to sell it. And you may not have time to sell it yourself. You may need to sell it in the winter. The wholesale prices or the trade-in value, of course we're not going to trade in if this scenario you're just going to get out free and clear from the bike. So you're looking at wholesale pricing, and that's much less than retail pricing. So you combine everything together, you really should be putting down a minimum of 20% down payment of the purchase price, and that's a price that's no greater than MSRP, because if you're paying for surcharges, you're not going to get that back when you resell it. That money's gone. That goes in the dealer's pocket. That extra value doesn't exist with subsequent purchasers. So kiss that money goodbye. We're not talking about any negative equity that you may have carried over from a trade-in. Just for this example, just look at purchasing a brand new bike and where you're going to be in 8 years. So the other thing I would say is don't roll any other things into the payment or the purchase of the bike. Just strictly the purchase of the bike, less your down payment. That's what you're financing. So I suggested you put down a minimum of 20% down payment. I also suggest that you don't finance for more than 4 years, because otherwise the amount of principal that you pay in any given month is going to be a lot lower. So if that happens, chances are at any given point in time, especially in the first few years, you're going to still owe more money on the bike than it's actually worth in terms of wholesale pricing. Another rule of thumb, and this gets a little stickier, is general financial guidance is when you're trying to figure out if you can afford a car payment, is that the car payment shouldn't exceed 10% of your gross monthly income. And I'm not sure that applies directly to a motorcycle. It may actually be less. Or you could just say, in general, motorcycles a discretionary purchase, and someone's total discretionary purchases shouldn't exceed about 30% of their income. That gets confusing. It also gets into individual values. Sometimes I'm riding the back roads of Kansas in rural counties, and I'll see somebody that lives in a single wide trailer, and that trailer may be worth $20,000, and they've got a $25,000 or $30,000 Harley parked out front. Now, some people would say that person has their priorities straight. Other people would say, hey, they shouldn't be buying a Harley if they're living in a single wide trailer. But again, that's a value judgment. I think it's up to each individual how they want to spend their money. We're just talking about raw affordability. And if you get into a situation where you're behind on payments, you're hard up for cash, and you can't really rely on selling the bike retail to get the maximum amount of money out of it, you're looking at selling it wholesale. And if that happens, you can't expect to have extra cash on hand to make up the difference between what the dealer's going to give you and the extra amount to get you to where you are whole in terms of what you owe on the bike. So, if you owe 20 grand on the bike and the dealer's going to give you $15,000, you got to come up with another $5,000. So my advice is geared towards, being in a situation that at any given point where you have to sell the bike, you get at least as much as you owe on it, so you can just get out from under the thing. So with that in mind, let's look at this 10% rule. The average annual salary or income in the United States is about $70,000 a year. So that's $5,800 a month. 10% would be $580 a month in terms of a payment. Then this ultra limited example, they were looking at $440 some a month. So in terms of that litmus test, somebody could swing the monthly payment, but again, they got to look at all the other expenditures that they have. So to me, the discipline comes down to making sure you're making a down payment of at least 20%, you're not financing for over 4 years, and you're not rolling these other expenses, whether it's accessories, taxes, license, all that stuff into the payment. They'll be glad to do it, because obviously the more they finance, the more money they make off the interest charges. These dealers will be glad to get you in way over your head if they can close the deal. In fact, I got to give a shout out to Veteran Biker. There's a link in the description to his channel. He sent me this flyer where a Harley dealer was advertising, if you had a bankruptcy, a divorce, or you don't even have a job, we'll find a way to get you your motorcycle purchase financed. So I think in that scenario, they're looking for a co-signer. I don't know, if you had a friend who was either divorced, bankrupt, or had no job, would you co-sign a loan for that person? I wouldn't, but that's just me. So pretty aggressive, some would say predatory sales tactics. So just because someone's willing to finance a motorcycle doesn't mean that you can actually afford it. But if you do that, you're going to be upside down for many years on the loan. So that's my advice. Please let me know what you think in the comments section, and please stay tuned for future videos. Thanks very much, everyone.